Greetings all, my name is Selena Rosado, and welcome to part 3 of this 3-part video series going over the ins and outs of organ maintenance. In this section, we'll go over some preventative maintenance, organ chamber safety and etiquette, and some discussion on general communication and relationship building with your technician. So some common things that can be especially useful both immediately and in the long run. First, keep track of all, and I mean all, of your service tickets and maintenance logs. And ideally they'd be, your technician would have a system for this, but even any sort of scribbles, definitely keep them. Digitize them if possible so you have both hard copies and digital copies for yourself and your institution's records. This will help your technician notice trends with tuning and maintenance problems, especially seasonal trends, and can assist in many other ways as well. Another important concept is getting to know where everything is. This is a huge time and money saver. They say that there are many different and difficult aspects to being an organ technician, but I would argue that the hardest aspect by far is finding an unlocked door to a church on a weekday. Before your technician gets on site, make sure the chambers are unlocked, any necessary access equipment or ladders are easily accessible, and that you know where the blower room and the lights are. Also, if there are any additional keys required to access the console, relay, or internal chamber doors, make sure they're available and accessible as well. Speaking of organ chambers, a general rule of thumb is that if you are absolutely not confident and comfortable entering a chamber for whatever reason, don't. Organ chambers can be super dangerous places and can lead to either you hurting yourself or causing damage to an instrument. So if you're unsure, just don't. This brings up another point. Organ chambers are not and should not be used as storage closets, ever. You'd be surprised at the amount of things that we have found as technicians in organ chambers. Don't store things on reservoirs or in blower rooms, as they can be very tempting to use as shelves. This can cause major damage to an instrument, cause fires, affect wind pressure, and impede necessary access. This brings us to our next topic of general building maintenance. As a rule of thumb, water and organs don't mix. Again, they really don't mix. Actually, in one of my recent church jobs, I came across this. I started a job at a church that hadn't used the organ in a while, and the associate pastor approached me and asked what they could do with the budget to help maintain the organ, which made me extremely excited because this church was, and still is, extremely invested in the organ and wanting what's best for the instrument. The first thing I told them to do was, if possible, to repair the roof. Water damage from leaky roofs can cost a church a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. I've seen everything from just minor repairs from minor leaks happen, which is still an inconvenience and costs money, to having entire instruments be destroyed by water damage. Especially when you're taking into consideration the water-sensitive leather and electrical components. So step 1 is to ensure the instrument is not exposed to water or the elements, really, of any kind. The same goes for temperature and humidity changes. Make sure temperature and humidity levels remain within a reasonable sort of range, if possible. And finally, pests. Rodents, raccoons, bats, you name it, can cause serious damage to an organ. So please, pest-proof your instrument. These are just some of the starting aspects to make sure your instrument remains in its top condition for as long as possible. Even though it's the beginning, it's definitely important. Well, I'm not pressing anything in the pedal, but every time I draw a stop, something's playing. So where do we go from here? Well, kind of a really good starting place is making sure that the area underneath your pedal board is clean. And maintaining a clean console and a clean pedal board is super important. So as you can see, this one has a decent amount of debris on it and under it. And you'll see paper clips, such as that can shift around and get into the pedal contacts that lie directly underneath these keys and can cause a huge issue, essentially causing the pedal to make contact even when you're not touching it. So first step is to check for basically any sort of, especially metal or objects that could be in the way. Now let's talk about tuning, part 2. Generally speaking, I've told clients that the organ should be tuned twice a year, once per major season change. A lot of churches opt to do this before Christmas, and if it works with the schedule before Easter, some will postpone till late summer. It really just depends on where you live and what the institution's needs are. Although in Oklahoma, when talking about seasonal changes, let's be honest, the seasons change every 15 minutes. But in general, twice a year is a good way to go. Some clients may request more, some may request less. It really all depends on the budget and several other unique factors. There are 2 types of tunings, generally speaking. A quote-unquote full tuning, where the organ is essentially retempered, which if you haven't looked up the concept of temperaments, you should look it up. It's actually really cool and really interesting. And what we call tune from scratch, where basically almost every pipe in the instrument is touched if needed. And more commonly, there are touch-up tunings, where just the most serious tuning issues are addressed, and these are, again, more common, and generally what you would find in a seasonal tuning. An organ does not need a full tuning every time, as generally they will settle into their environments that they're in. Speaking of environments, when preparing for a tuning, make sure the HVAC system is set to what we call, quote, Sunday morning temperature. Ideally the night before and throughout the duration of the tuning. This will make for optimal tuning results. And as always, if stuff is just wildly out after a visit, or even if things need to be touched up within, a reasonable range, feel free to call us back. A good technician will go back and touch up if something is needed, or if it can't be fixed or went out for a particular reason or couldn't be addressed at the last visit. They'll hopefully explain why a certain ring or set of pipes cannot be tuned for a specific maintenance reason and provide you with information on next steps to remedy this problem. Some of you may find yourselves in a church job needing to provide some insight on future repairs of the instrument, or some of you may find yourselves on organ committees. Here are a couple of the most common preventative maintenance situations that we come across. Number 1, releathering a component or part of an organ or an entire organ. This can be either pipework, chest mechanisms, or winding components. Leather ages, dries out, breaks, and needs to be replaced after several decades. Remember when we talked about different types of pipes in the first video? Well, this is where some of this comes in handy. Stopped wooden pipes, called Borden, Subas, Gedeckt, or other names, have wooden stoppers on the top, usually with leather on the outside. These stoppers need to be packed with new leather after several decades, otherwise they can slip down the inside of the pipe and cause tuning or speech problems. Another issue we'll come across is metal fatigue. This is common of instruments from a variety of eras. This will show up with smashed toes and sometimes collapsing reeds or flues. And finally, occasionally, but not super often, reeds will need to be cleaned. And reeds are sort of interesting because if debris, as explained in the video, gets into the shallot, and here's a picture of a cricket in a trumpet, the reed will not speak. So just emphasizing that point, that could be a cause for several dead notes, but is usually a really easy fix. Probably the final and most important aspect I want to touch on is build a good relationship with your organ technician. Take us out for a meal. Believe me, we love to answer your questions and talk to you about what we do and the instrument that you play. If you're even remotely curious about the industry, or just organ building in general, please reach out. The organ world desperately needs more qualified service technicians and organ builders, and your local builder will be more than happy to welcome you for a shop tour or to shadow along some of their work. If you're unsure of whether or not to take on a repair or a project, also definitely reach out to us. Thank you once again for joining me on this series, and feel free to reach out with any additional questions.